So we're going to move right next to Representative Norris's bill, House File 439. Representative Hill, would you like to move House File 439 before the committee?
So moved.
With the intention to lay over for an education finance bill? It's so moved, so it's before our committee. Representative Norris, welcome to the Education Finance Committee, and you may proceed with your testimony.
Great. Thanks, Chair Joachim and members of the committee. It's great to be before you this morning in Education Finance. When I go out and talk to Minnesotans, it seems like the only thing that comes up more often than the weather in our conversations is what to do with our budget surplus. And I always tell folks that I want us to focus on what's going to deliver the longest and highest ROI for our state. And especially when it comes to our ongoing structural surplus, I can't think of any place that would provide a higher ROI than investing in our public education system here in Minnesota. One of the challenges our schools across the state have faced is that our general formula is not keeping up with inflation. The general formula is the most flexible source of funding for our school districts. They use it to hire teachers, to pay hourly school workers a fair wage, to make needed capital improvements, and much more. It's the largest source of revenue for our school districts as well. For a typical school district, that makes up approximately 56% of their total operating revenue. And members, you've got a chart in your materials today that shows two different lines. The solid line is going back to 2003. If we had just kept our school funding for the general formula consistent with inflation, we'd be looking at an amount of $8,126 per student. But currently, the dashed line is what the legislature has approved since 2003, and we're only at $6,863. So that accounts for a $1,263 per student gap compared to if we had just kept up with inflation over the past 2 decades. So this bill aims to correct the chronic underfunding of our schools by taking a substantial step toward catching up. It uses our surplus to increase the general formula by 5% each of the next 2 years and then indexes it to inflation after that. This significant investment will support all Minnesota students, teachers, and support staff. It will help retain staff and address critical staffing shortages, including teachers, paraprofessionals, counselors, social workers, school nurses, and bus drivers. It will provide mental health supports and violence prevention. It'll remediate interrupted learning and boost the recovery efforts from COVID. It will close opportunity gaps among students and families. It will stabilize funding and services to students as the federal ESSER revenue starts to sunset. And it will reduce class sizes. It's also important to note that this bill will help to reduce property taxes by increasing state investment in our schools and easing the burden of using local property taxes to fund our education system. We have a number of testifiers, including one of the superintendents from my House district, as well as a teacher from one of the districts in my House district, who can share more about the impact this bill would have on our schools and all of the students throughout our state. So I'm looking forward to hearing some great testimony from them. But Chair Joachim, I'm wondering if perhaps before we get into the testimony, members have a fairly detailed spreadsheet in front of them. I'm wondering if Mr. Strom might be able to just at a high level kind of walk them through what's involved in this spreadsheet.
Representative Norris, you are reading my mind. I'm actually going to have Mr. Strom walk through the runs as well as have Ms. Beckel walk through the fiscal notes. So, Mr. Strom.
Madam Chair, members, in your packet on legal sides, paper turned sideways, landscape style, there's a printout showing general education revenue for fiscal years 24 and 25 under the baseline scenarios, and then showing the increase with the 5% formula each of the 2 years. Very briefly, the printout is organized as many that you've seen before, with the top 7 lines showing the different strata, different groupings of school districts basically by geographic region or size. and showing the pupil units in those districts. So the first column is the student count that's used for funding purposes. So if you took Aiken as an example, district number 1, they've got 1,077 pupil units for the year. Under the baseline projection on November 22 forecast data, all of the components of general education, including the formula allowance, amount to about $10.3 million or $9,623 per pupil. A 5% increase in the basic formula, which is linked to compensatory and sparsity revenue on this printout, shows the increase to $10,816,000 for that district, or $10,039 per pupil. The next two columns show that amount as a gain, an increase of $448,000, and then that amount per pupil, $416. So for the Aiken School District, a 5% increase in general education revenue that first year is a $416 per pupil increase. The same columns are then repeated for the next fiscal year 25. You can see the district reported slightly fewer pupils for that year. The base revenue amount expected, should no legislation be enacted, is $10.08 million, or $9,596 per pupil. Under the 5% and 5% increase, so the revenue goes up 5% on the formula the first year and another 5% the second year, that amount increases to $10.98 million, or $10,446 per pupil. So in the second year, that's an $893,000 increase for the district, or an $850 increase. So Madam Chair, in brief, if you look at the very top lines, a 5% increase on average provides school districts an additional $396 over base in the first year, and in the second year, a 5 and 5 increase provides districts an $810 increase over base as well. So Madam Chair, that's a very quick summary of the printouts. Again, these districts are listed in numeric order, which if you think about them as in county alphabetical order, you'll find most of your districts there, and then charter schools are in the 4,000s.
Thank you, Mr. Strom. Ms. Beckel, would you like to go over the fiscal note, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Solveig Beckel, House Fiscal. The fiscal note that you'll find in your packets has 4 pages. On the front page, it provides a basic summary explaining that in the first biennium, this bill will cost $1.047 billion. In the second biennium, the bill will cost $1.719 billion. And then when you get to pages 2 and 3, that provides some of the explanation and assumptions. The concept is pretty simple, 5% and 5% in the first 2 years, and then the formula is linked to inflation the following 2 years, and later. And then if you are looking at Mr. Strom's printout and you'd like to match those numbers to the chart on page 3, you can take a look at, let's see, fiscal year 24, 5% increase on formula, and compare that number, the total number, to the Gen Ed aid entitlement under difference. And under 24, that number should line up at $369,559,000. And then if you run over to the fiscal year 25 number, that $752,544,000 number lines up with fiscal year 25. Those, of course, are the aid entitlements. In education, things are often shifted, as is the general ed aid entitlement. So to get the appropriations that you see on the first page, the money is then 90-10, so you take 90% of the current year funding and then 10% of the prior year funding and add them together. So For fiscal year '24, it's just 90% of that current year entitlement, which you will see on the total line on the chart on page 3, which is how they arrive at the fiscal year '24 $332,603,000 number, and so on. And Madam Chair, that's the fiscal note.
Thank you, Ms. Peckel. With that, members, I think we'll move to testifiers, and the first person I have on our list is Tina Burkholder, and then Kathy Nathan on deck. Go ahead, get settled, and then please state your name for the record and proceed.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Tina Burkholder, and I'm the Director of Business Services at Monticello Public Schools, and also a past president of MASBO, which is the Minnesota Association of School Business Officials. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. As a school business official who is responsible for the budget, I prepare long-range financial forecasts to make educated and informed prediction of our school district's financial future. The forecast attempts to determine how financial information will impact the overall district's operations and how we will educate and serve our students and support all of our staff. Recently, I updated my financial forecast for my school board with similar programming, but including the governor's proposal of 4% and 2% for fiscal years '24 and '25 as the general education basic formula increase. We have a close to break-even year for 2024, but we start to deficit spend by $1.4 million in fiscal year 2025, which is 2.6% of our $53 million budget. This doesn't allow us to lower class sizes or add staff to address other student needs for special education, literacy coaches, or other English language support that our students so desperately need. Also, with building and department budgets, we have been keeping budgets frozen for many years. Building leads and department heads are really seeing higher prices on their school materials and supply orders due to inflation. The purchasing power of the dollar has decreased over time due to inflation, and the employees aren't able to purchase as much as they used to with similar funds. My school district, as probably other districts in the state, is experiencing the real fiscal and budgeting impact of inflation. I ask for your support for House File 439 to increase the general education formula allowance to 5% for fiscal years '24 and '25 and index that to inflation to help school districts close that budget gap and see those, address those student needs.
Thank you, Director Burkholder. Next up, we have Kathy Nathan.
Good morning, Madam Chair, committee members. My name is Kathy Nathan. I'm here as a Rochester School Board member and a Minnesota PTA Board member. This year, the Minnesota PTA celebrates 100 years of advocating for children and their families. While reviewing our archives for items to highlight during our celebration, we found documents from a 2005 statewide advocacy effort, and I quote, "to catch up school funding to inflation because Minnesota's current investment in education fell short of what is required to ensure all students have the opportunity to achieve state and federally mandated standards." Almost 2 decades later, the message is the same, and I ask you to support House File 439 to increase the per pupil formula by 5% in the next 2 years and to tie future funding to inflation. The instability in state education funding means every year is a guessing game for families and staff as school boards and superintendents consider cutting expenditures to balance our budgets when the revenues provided by the state don't match inflationary increases out of our control. As a Rochester School Board member, I had to make a very difficult decision last week to accept the superintendent's recommendation to make $14 million in budget cuts to address next year's budget deficit, including 143.6 teacher, education support professional, and staff cuts to increase class sizes and reduce middle and high school elective options. Those yearly conversations about cuts to staff and programs are disruptive, and districts everywhere in the state are distracted from meeting today's student needs. And today we need more stability and more focus than ever because the needs of our students have never been higher. You have choices before you that would show families where your priorities are when it comes to students and schools. With your support of House File 439, you have a rare opportunity to bring stability to education funding going forward. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you so much. Next up, we have Dr. Kent Patel, Superintendent, Rochester Public Schools, who is also remote. Go ahead, state your name for the record and proceed.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Kent Patel. I am Superintendent of Schools here in Rochester, Minnesota. The chair of our school board, Kathy Nathan, just hit many of the points that I want to agree are critical in strongly supporting this legislation before you. But I'd also like to come at this through a slightly different angle than it is often talked about, and that's through the lens of improving student outcomes. There's some pretty good research that shows that it takes at least 3 to 5 years to significantly improve student outcomes at the school level if a school is really serious and doing the right things in terms of instruction and curriculum and school operations. And then by extension, some somewhat less robust but still really interesting research that says improvement at the system level in a state like Minnesota or a province or even a small country takes about 8 years. That length of time to achieve our mission of helping all kids develop the knowledge and skills they need to succeed is because we are, as we often say, reinventing the airplane as we're flying it when we're engaged in serious school improvement. I am sure many of you as legislators are following the current discussion about the transition to what is often called the science of reading, but really recognizing the fact that for several decades in the United States, we have not adequately invested in many places in young learners' ability to decode letters and sounds, which has huge implications for their progress through school. And so if, like we are in Rochester, you are aiming to address that need, concurrent with serving the students that we're currently privileged to serve, you are rethinking curriculum, rethinking professional development, rethinking assessment so you can measure those things. None of those things are quick fixes that can be planned for and implemented in a 1 or 2 year period. In the 1990s, the United Kingdom, when Tony Blair was prime minister, made really dramatic progress at scale as a nation. They went from kind of being the bottom of international assessments to kind of the bottom of the middle. And they did a lot of things right. They had a national literacy strategy, for one. But another thing they did was they guaranteed schools at least 3 years of stable funding adjusted for enrollment so that they could plan the kind of serious improvements that we know it takes to improve student outcomes. And so while I strongly support the 5% and 5% increase that is before you in this legislation for the next biennium, it is that connection of inflation to the general fund that I think could be transformative for Minnesota education. This bill, I think, appropriately attaches that increase to the consumer price index, but it's worth briefly noting that the consumer price index measures the increases in the prices of goods and services purchased for consumption by all urban households. That's actually quite different than a school district where we have 85% of our costs are staff salary. So if you used another measure of inflation that's really more relevant for an organization like a school district, which is the implicit price deflator for state and local government, if you use that measure, even though state aid for K-12 education in Minnesota has increased in monetary terms by 50% since 2003, using the implicit price deflator, we actually have decreased by 15%. And so at a time when the stakes are higher than ever before, we actually in real terms are spending less than we were 2 decades ago. The consumer price index, I think, is the more appropriate measure for this legislation. So in highlighting that alternative measure, I'm not suggesting a change. But any way you count it, we're behind. And this legislation could do a great deal to help Minnesota schools catch up. Final point that I'd briefly make is I think a lot of us are reading about and paying attention to balloons over our heads these days and wondering if they're from China or some other place. I think it's fair to say that if you told the U.S. military or the CIA that they had to plan to address threats like that and could not count on inflationary increases in their budget to pay for salaries and materials, they would say, we're undermining the mission and not serious. And I think in our educational endeavors, which as the author of the bill said at the beginning, have tremendous potential for return on investment, the same kind of smart funding strategy could pay huge dividends for our students in the years ahead. So thank you for the opportunity to lend my support to this bill.
Thank you, Dr. Pickell. I let you go over because I get really excited about talking about the implicit price deflator, because we have actually been thinking about using that index measure for services versus a basket of goods when we've been talking about this for over 18 years. So thank you very
Thank you.
much for your time. Next up, we have Bob Indahar, and then on deck, Jeff Holmberg.
Chair Joachim and members of the committee, I am Bob Indahar. I'm the Executive Director of the Minnesota Rural Education Association. We represent 235 rural school districts throughout the state. I'm here to testify in favor of House File 439, and it is our top priority in MREA. Our organization represents most of the nearly 100 school districts that have no voter-approved operating referendum. They rely heavily on the general education formula dollars to run their district. While other districts have been able to overcome shortfalls of their budget with operating referendum revenue, these districts are forced to make tough decisions about student support and staffing due to having fewer dollars. The reason this is so important this year is that inflation is hurting their bottom line more now than in recent years. Think about it: salaries, subs, healthcare, basic supplies, contracted services, they're all up because of inflation. According to the Department of Labor and Statistics, the CPI in 2021 and 2022 was 4.7% and 8% respectively. While the basic formula allowance has been increased over the year, it has not kept up with inflation. As Representative Norris mentioned, it's down $1,263 per pupil. That's an 18% decrease over the last 20 years. The most important or the most impactful funding stream to schools to support the education of students is money on the formula. It is fair and stable. We see that close to 90 cents of every dollar is distributed equally to students. Every district in the state gets the same dollar base amount from the percentage increase on the basic formula allowance. The remaining money is distributed across districts with compensatory sparsity transportation, and declining enrollment revenue, which is tied to the basic formula allowance. Districts have the most flexibility with this revenue stream and can make decisions at a local level to do what's best for their district students. Inflation is a real problem that districts must deal with. There is no business that can stay viable in Minnesota when they make a budget without an inflationary factor. Districts are forced to do this while they wait for the legislature and governor to finalize the E12 budget, a decision that often comes months after local decision budgeting has begun. And in some cases, after required termination notices have went out. This is not the way to be good stewards of the state's core constitutional duty to fund systems of public education. Districts need a predictable funding stream to make systemic change over time. Without it, all you can do is have short-term initiatives. Tying the basic formula to inflation is needed to create a predictable funding stream for districts to operate for the long term. Thank you for your time and listening.
Thank you, Ms. Director Indahar. Next up, we have Jeff Holmberg. Please state your name for the record and proceed.
Good morning, Madam Chair, committee members. My name is Jeff Holmberg, Superintendent of Centennial Schools, and I'm here to testify in support of House File 439, a bill to increase basic education formula by 5% in fiscal years 2024, 2025, and index to inflation. I'm representing the Centennial Schools community, which includes Blaine, Centerville, Circle Pines, Lexington, and Lino Lakes, as well as two partner organizations, the Association of Metropolitan School Districts and the Minnesota School Boards Association. Now is the time to invest in our youth, our state's future. I'm grateful to see a recommended 5% increase on the formula being addressed during this year's legislative session. As noted earlier this morning, historically, the state's funding on the formula has not kept up with the school district's cost of educating students. If state funding had included inflationary indexing in the past, Centennial would have had an additional $11 million of funding available from a $90 million general fund budget. This is why we support the proposed inflationary increase to the basic formula in this bill. The 5% in each of the biennium years impacts the revenue Centennial receives in state funding in the following way. On the revenue side, the basic formula is approximately 60% of our general fund revenue budget. The increase over the biennium would provide an additional funding of approximately $5 million to improve the students' educational experience and their outcomes. This is significant and necessary investment in our students and important for several reasons. The district faces rising costs of doing business, which includes investments in our staff. We have to remain competitive with other districts and the private sector in order to attract staff to fill positions from teachers, paraprofessionals, nurses, custodians, and food service. Staffing shortages in these areas create additional needs for salary improvements in order to recruit and retain. Centennial also faces increases in contracted service costs as well in the areas of mental health counseling, transportation, utilities, supplies, curriculum, and even officials at our co-curricular events, as these costs have increased significantly over the past several years. More specifically, on the investments necessary to recruit and retain staff, salaries and benefits make up approximately 75% of our general fund expenditures. Hypothetically, if Centennial were to budget a 2% increase on salary and benefits for staff, include step and lane adjustments, and a 2% increase across all other district budget areas, the expenditure amount would equate to a biennium cost of approximately $6.5 million. While there is a gap between revenues and expenditures, this is a start and step in the right direction. The 5% in each year outlined in House File 439 would have a significant impact on Centennial's budget, providing additional funding to support the expenses I have outlined this morning. The inflationary index will also help us moving forward as well. A healthier budget allows schools to provide the necessary educational opportunities for students, and I urge the committee to invest in our youth in our schools by acting favorably on House File 439. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you, Superintendent Hallberg. With that, members, I think we'll move on to, public testimony. I'm so sorry about that. We did have some folks sign up for public testimony, and that we have Christy Peterson, School Board Chair from Shakopee, and Valerie Holthus from Anoka Hennepin on deck. Please state your name for the record and proceed.
Good morning, Madam Chair and fellow committee members. My name is Christy Peterson, and I currently serve as a school board chair for Independent District 720 Shakopee Public Schools. I'm a board member for Southwest Metro Intermediate School District 288 and also serve as a board of director representing Director District 13 for the Minnesota School Board Association. In addition, I'm a proud graduate from Ellsworth Public Schools, a very small Minnesota public school district. I'm here this morning to urge the passage of House File 439 as presented, which increases the general education formula by 5% in each year of the next biennium for all of our public schools across Minnesota, in addition to an inflation calculator added to the formula moving forward. While public schools across the state have been appreciative of the small increases on the formula in the past, these small increases have not kept up with inflation. When school funding does not keep pace with inflation, it puts our school districts in a very difficult situation and impacts every facet of providing a quality education to our students. These increases in costs have put school districts and school board members in a very tough position, resulting in a reduction of expenses in places where it matters the most, and that's our classroom. When you look at the rate of inflation over the past 10 years, and the percent increase on the general education formula, you see in the chart that you were provided a gap that widens very quickly every year. And that gap actually really started back in 1995. However, inflation is only one contributing factor as to why I urge the passage of House File 439. Another significant factor is the amount of unfunded mandates that every school district in Minnesota has to implement and execute. The reality is that when these mandates are put into law without the appropriate funding, it is forcing districts to do more with less. While mandates are meant to improve education in very specific disciplines, there are often unintended consequences that often cause harm to students across every district. There are more state-level mandates than we have at the federal level. Unfunded mandates, while well-intended, do have adverse impacts on every school district. They diminish local innovation. They result in additional local cost, usually in the form of additional record-keeping, staffing, and documentation. Failure to comply can result in fines, penalties, and potential litigation. Lack of local control and decreased morale in the district, and interruptions of long-term or strategic planning and goals. In my district, our school board recently had to make the gut-wrenching decision to reduce our budget by $7.5 million just to balance our expenditures with the revenue that we receive. This resulted in a reduction of 50 classroom teachers, several counselors, and other classroom support positions. This is in addition to having some of the lowest paid teachers and staff in the metro area. It forced our district to ask our community for additional tax dollars just to balance our budget and to restore some of these significant cuts that were made. Our local taxpayers should not have to provide the extra funding to support Shakopee Public Schools for state mandates that are unfunded. Our society has changed significantly over the past 10 years. The needs of our district are very different than 5 years ago. Some of these needs include mental health support and services for not only our students, but also our staff. Updated curriculum to improve student learning performance in core subjects such as math, science, and reading. School districts are seeing teachers leave the profession because they can manage a big box retail store and make more money, which they need to support their families. Our funding was never adjusted to match these societal changes. The passage of House File 439 would positively impact all 7,800 students in Shakopee Public Schools. The 5% and 5% increase, along with the addition of the inflation calculator on the formula, would allow Shakopee to do the necessary things to improve student outcomes, such as mental health professionals, adopt curriculum to improve those student outcomes, improve upon teacher compensation to help retain the incredible staff that we already have in place, and so much more. It is time to close this gap. What we invest in our students today will pay dividends in our state for years to come. Let's show our students and staff how important public education is in Minnesota by stepping out from the normal 2% and 2% increase on the formula and pass the proposed 5% and 5% increase in the next biennium with the inflation calculator. On behalf of Shakopee Public Schools and all school board members across the state that I represent as a member of the Board of Directors for the Minnesota School Board Association, I ask you to support the passage of House File 439. Thank you.
Thank you, School Board Chair. Thank you for highlighting the fact that if we index the formula to inflation, that you're going to be able to deal with any mandates we give to your schools. Members, making sure here that we only have one more testifier and then discussion. We have 2 other bills on the docket. I've kind of given leeway to folks to talk twice as long as we've asked, but I have Valerie Holthus next, so please keep it brief.
Hello, Madam Chair, committee members. My name is Val Holtus. I'm a teacher on leave from the Anoka-Hennepin School District, currently serving as president of the Anoka-Hennepin Education Association. We're currently facing a teacher and staff shortage crisis in our schools. In my district, there are currently 35 openings for teachers. This does not include openings for substitute teachers. There are 44 openings for paraprofessionals. In our neighboring district, Osseo, there are 74 open positions for paraprofessionals. The chronic underfunding of schools has meant that less and less money has been directed into our classrooms over the years, which means less funding has gone directly to our students and the licensed educators who meet their academic, social, and emotional needs. Minnesota's share of funding for public schools hasn't kept pace with inflation. The North Star Policy Institute released a study that indicates we have underfunded schools by 20% over the last 20 years. I want to thank Representative Norris for bringing forward House File 439 that invests 5% per year on the general education formula and ties the increase to inflation. This will help the state catch up on its commitment to funding public education. Last night, I had dinner with a friend of mine who's a teacher in my school district. She wanted to talk to me about leaving the profession of education. She loved teaching for the last 27 years. Her class sizes were manageable, and she had a student who needed behavior support. She could always call Mr. Price, the school social worker, who would give the student what they needed, whatever it was. Mr. Price retired, and his position was not filled because of budget cuts. Now her class sizes are so large, and she has 3 students who need behavior support with no Mr. Price to call. I would urge you all to think about teachers this year and the countless students they'll touch over the course of their career as you consider the funding decisions you're making this year. Please put the resources in their classrooms that they need. A 5% increase in the formula is much appreciated, but we think you could go bigger and also be more focused on your approach to funding public education in Minnesota. Teachers need fewer students in their class to give each student the attention they deserve. They need more counselors, more school nurses, 1 in every building. And they need support personnel to meet the needs for their students so they are not the last line of defense for that student. They need more time to prep and meet with students. They need dedicated training for the support personnel their students rely on. This is why we need more money on the formula and need it directed to specific areas to make sure those funds are supporting students and educators. I thank you so much for listening to my testimony today.
Thank you, Valerie Holthus, for bringing us back to the folks that are doing the work in the classroom with our students, our teachers, and how important it is to make sure you're supported. With that, members, I think we've reached the end of our testifier list for those who have signed up beforehand and today. Do we have any questions from members? Representative Pryor.
All right, and this is a question, and we'll find out who can answer it. But I know that, we do our work and we will be passing a budget bill by the end of session or as soon as we're able to for this funding. How long does it take before the actual increases would actually get to a school district? I mean, because we've known that budgets are being made now. But what is the timing where, when we pass this, that we can say, yep, this is, we can start planning on this increased funding going forward? And is it, it's not going to be in this next school year is what I would imagine. And is it the next school year that we would have an impact, or would it have any impact on the school year at all?
Representative, would you like
The
to
upcoming
toss
school
to Mr. Strom? Or Representative Norris?
That'd be great, Chair Yuki.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Strom?
Madam Chair, members, the increase in the bill would take effect starting July 1st for the school year that's the 2023-24 school year. The payments to school districts use an accounting system where they have essentially an accrual accounting system, and they get their payments from the state in 23 payments throughout the year. There's a statutory schedule for when they get that money, but it would start going to districts starting on July 15th that they'd first see an increase. And then the system is referred to as the metering system, so that money is metered out over the school year then through June 30th. And then there are a series of cleanup payments based on final pupil counts and things in the fall of 2024.
Okay. And
Representative Pryor,
just
follow-up.
if I can paraphrase what you're saying, and to the bill author, this is, so in terms of planning, they can't school districts can't plan for the money right now, but they will have the money in these payments that will be going forward. So it's that promise that we'll be making and probably are being followed with great interest right now.
Thank you, Representative Pryor. Members, any other questions? This is a pretty hefty bill, so. Representative Grisha.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative Norris, for bringing it forward. I know a lot of schools are looking for removing that uncertainty. Certainly, I think this is a good place to start. We have targets and joint targets that we'll be waiting for, so there's a lot to happen between now and then. So thank you for bringing this forward.
Members, any other questions? Well, then I'll just take a chair's prerogative and say thank you, Representative Norris, for bringing this bill forward. I think indexing to the formula to inflation is a systematic change that we can make that would bring the biggest impact to our schools. But I just want to thank you for doing the work and give you the final word.
Thanks, Chair Joachim. And again, I want to express my appreciation to all the testifiers who came in today and I think so eloquently articulated the impact that this bill can have. Ms. Peterson talked about, how they're having to eliminate 50 classroom teacher positions. Ms. Holtas talked about teachers leaving the classroom and a social worker position not being filled. Mr. Indahar talked about how they have to send out termination notices while they're waiting for, to find out what the legislature is going to do with school funding. So I think this bill would address a lot of those concerns. I think it's time and it's appropriate to make a significant investment in our education system. And I think Superintendent Holmberg put it best when he said, now is the time to invest in our youth. Anybody who knows the fact that I've worked in youth development my whole career knows that I couldn't agree with that more wholeheartedly. And I look forward to hopefully seeing this in your omnibus bill when it gets rolled out, Chair Joachim.
Thank you, Representative Norris. And with that, House File 439 is laid over for possible inclusion in an education finance bill.